you're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landis. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Welcome back, everyone, to the Eatfluencer Podcast. I'm so glad you're here today. I have another guest episode you are going to love. I'm going to tell you all about that in just a moment. I want to remind you, if you are a health professional working in any profession that deals with human health, nutrition coach, dietitian, physician, physical therapist, chiropractor, I can't even list them all. I've got a free training that will help you establish the first step to take in adopting a weight-neutral approach to care in your clinical practice. And it's all about breaking up with the BMI. There's no shade being thrown here. I know you were trained to weigh patients and measure their BMI and use that as both a predictor of health, as a metric of change, and it's not really what our current scientific evidence supports doing any longer, but it can be really challenging to know how to change and what that might look like. So the link is in the show notes. It's also on my social media. It's on my website. If you find me anywhere, you will be able to find the link to this free 1-hour training. I really recommend any health professional that is even curious about health at every size and weight neutral healthcare to go to that link. All right, so let's get into today's show. This is episode 76 of the Eatfluencer Podcast. It's called The Psychology of Wellness. And why is it called that? Because I have a guest today who is the best expert, in my opinion, to talk about these aspects of our really toxic diet and wellness culture. She is a clinical psychologist, a doctorate level clinical psychologist who has almost 2 decades of experience at this point working in fields, both research related and direct patient care, related to weight management, eating disorders, health and wellness. And really, she has worked, as many of us have, on both sides of the equation, both being trained in and working in a weight-centered professional kind of perspective, and also then having a career transformation to work and understand and teach and take care of patients in a weight-neutral, weight-inclusive way, which is what she does now. She's also a podcaster and has a podcast called Motivation Made Easy, Body Respect and True Health, because that is also an area of her expertise, the psychology of motivation and really the science about eating behavior. And I promise this will be super interesting. She and I are big nerds, but we keep this conversation really relevant to anybody because we have to understand that diet culture, wellness culture uses our built-in core human psychological needs to lure us in and keep us stuck. It is a exploitation of the sneakiest manner. It's like marketing psychology, but there's this added element of morality because it's about your health. And Dr. Hondorp is going to debunk a lot of things and define a lot of things for us. And really, there's a lot of aha moments in this conversation where you're going to be like, wow, that is exactly what's happening. And now that you identify exactly what's happening, you can make some decisions about how you want to proceed and or leave diet culture, reject diet culture, and really understand health and wellness from a very autonomous perspective. This is a great conversation. I don't want to delay us anymore, so we are going to get to the conversation with Dr. Hondorp right now. All right. Well, welcome, Dr. Shawn, to the podcast today. I'm so glad you joined me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, absolutely. And, of course, I follow your work pretty closely, and you are a psychologist, and I'm
Mhm.
a medical doctor. So we both come from this non-diet work from sort of different ends of the body, I guess. But the more and more and more I learn about all of this, there is so much tied into how we think about how our body works. And diet culture likes to blaspheme that and gaslight us and make it about as complicated as possible. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And
Mhm.
you were the only one that I thought of. I was like, oh, the psychology of wellness. I mean, that is like, if you're going to summarize in one line what we need to talk about, that's it. But before we get into that, Shawn, I'd like to ask you, how did you find yourself doing this work with intuitive eating, health at every size? This is not, like on the menu of like what they tell you in grad school, right?
No, definitely not. And I think it's kind of interesting to reflect on. And actually, I interviewed you on my podcast somewhat recently, and I think it's just kind of incredible to reflect on like how often we're in these fields for so long. And in many ways, looking back, I was sort of looking for these solutions for myself personally and also for people I was trying to help. And it took a really long time to find it, as you sort of can guess. And so essentially, I've been like formally studying kind of health and really the psychology of health and wellness. I was interested very early on, like I said, for many reasons probably, but partly probably personally because I was struggling. I started struggling with kind of disordered relationship with food, kind of the binge diet cycle around like when I was 16. And so in college, I kind of hit the ground running. I'm like, I'm gonna, research nutrition, psychology, and health. I took those classes like right away, starting at
Uh-huh.
undergrad at Michigan State, and I actually got connected with an amazing mentor doing genetics and biology of eating disorder research, and just fell in love with research and fell in love with. I really was interested in determining cause. So I would do a lot of like research studies. My honors thesis was like randomly assigning, actually, it was randomly assigning people to watch this television show called Starved. I don't know, most people haven't heard of it, but it was very negative depictions of people with eating disorders. So I studied, does this increase stigma of eating disorders? So anyway, random
Oh,
side note.
interesting. I never heard of it
Yeah.
either, but yeah, okay. I can see how that might be problematic.
Yes, I was like, this is not positive, but I was just really interested in like, can we manipulate one variable so we can know what's really causing it? Because that's the only way to determine true cause. But yeah, so I basically I was interested in that work, but then I ended up sort of going to grad school for more of the weight management, kind of obesity prevention was sort of my interest area, and was doing research in those areas. And basically, it took me a very long time to find this work that I'm intuitive eating and health at every size. I did not find that until the very end of my training. It was pretty much, I think, just a friend talked to me about this book, Intuitive Eating, and I listened to it actually on an audiobook. I was in training at Rush Medical Center in Chicago, and I was like, oh wow, this like it really helped me personally flip that switch. Finally, I was sort of I would say like I was really ready to read that book and really ready to. I never really thought of myself as too diety. Like I was like, oh, I'm always doing these like healthy lifestyle change, but I was
Right.
still stuck in that cycle as so many people are, right? Of like, and that was like the final string that I needed to cut of like, no, I'm really not going to focus on controlling my weight. So I found that personally really, really helpful. And of course, that influenced how I'm thinking about my practice, which I'm a health psychologist. So I've kind of always been in medical settings, but I have always had sort of a eating weight related focus to the work that I've done. And so I kind of gradually incorporated some of the things that worked for me, but I think it took me some time because within the medical system, as you know,
Oh
it's
yeah, it's
not well accepted, right?
right.
And
Right.
so I read Health at Every Size, I think a little bit after reading Intuitive Eating, and I'm like, oh wow, like this makes a ton of sense. And of course, it also shakes like your sense of what are we doing, right? And at that time,
Yeah.
I was working in a bariatric surgery clinic and also a preventive cardiology clinic. So I had a job that I was in both of those clinics. And yeah, I would say I tried to sort of incorporate what I knew and I believed within my settings. But as you can imagine, it was challenging to do so. And so about a year ago, I went off on my own, and now I do private practice and like my podcast, and I have an online program. So I'm doing things fully my way now, and it's been really incredible and amazing and really fun to, I think, more boldly talk about what I believe, but also see when we're removed from that medical setting, people can make more progress, achieve more freedom, kind of things click a lot better when we're not so caught up in, I mean, I was seeing them in a medical clinic, one of which was focused on weight loss, right? And
Right,
so,
exactly. Well, and I have to say the same thing. I mean, I've essentially left my clinical practice completely to pursue this movement or mission or whatever you want to call it, because there are so many problems and so many constraints in that other environment. You can't even see how big a problem this is because it's buried in all the problems. And so what I think is going to change the culture, and I really am hopeful that it will change, is people like you and I with the professional training and the knowledge of kind of insider knowledge. I mean, I think we had to have those careers up until this point to know what we know, right?
yeah.
And that's how we can sort of like shake the tree from the outside. And then as the culture changes and the system changes, maybe it will be more accepted in sort of May. And I think it's going to happen. I really do think it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen in 2 years or 5 years or 25 years, but I'm hopeful. I meet enough people like you and
Yeah.
like myself, out there that are doing this work in a variety of disciplines. So,
Yeah, I'm also hopeful because I think ultimately you and I worked in those settings, and we know that providers, whatever type of provider, they want effective strategies. They want to help their person, their patient, their whoever get better, right? And I
right.
think I think we have, it can be complicated, but like we have understanding about this, like ways that people get so stuck, and if we can empower them with like, here's how to help them get unstuck, I do think that will be
Right. Well, and it
great.
helps. Yeah. And we kind of are the past version of ourselves is kind of like our target audience now, you and I both, I think. And so I think we have this really unique point of view. I mean, I feel all the time like I'm sort of like straddling this. Like I'm not here to tell the doctors that they're doing the wrong thing for their patients. And I'm not here to tell the patients that their doctors are full of garbage. I said, I'm here to tell you that like y'all are not hearing each other and seeing what's actually going on. And like maybe some really simple little things regarding this weight stigma in clinical practice and stuff can totally help. Like it will help both parties. And
Yeah.
to help both parties realize that, I see as part of the work, well, a lot of the work I do, honestly. But the fact that I have been a doctor and I've been a patient is pretty useful. And the fact that,
Definitely.
you're a clinical psychologist and you've, been on the sort of receiving end of those types of services, you understand. So, well, let's
Yeah.
get into some psychology here. Okay. And I promised my audience this wouldn't be like super duper high level, like PhD nerd fest, although it's tempting because I love that kind of chatter.
Sure.
You talk about something all the time about these 3 key psychological needs. This is this Maslow? I don't know who studied this first. I'm throwing myself.
So no, so actually, self-determination theory is a really well-studied theory of motivation. I don't know if DC and Ryan are the last names of the two men that founded this theory, and they've applied it. You can apply it to any area, but we're applying it to health behaviors in our conversation today.
So apply that dumb this down like to a person who doesn't have a PhD. Like what does this self-determination theory mean?
So essentially it's across cultures, we've studied what we know about the type of motivation that we want if we're going to want to have long-term motivation. If we want to do something long-term, essentially the holy grail of motivation is autonomous motivation, because when it's autonomous, it's most likely to, if you're autonomously motivated for something you're doing today, let's say exercise or movements, you're most likely to be continuing to do some form of exercise or movement 1 year, 3 years down the line. So we want to kind of move towards autonomous motivation, away from controlled motivation. And this has been, there's a lot of misconceptions about motivation, this idea of you're either motivated or you're not motivated. And what we know is it's actually, we're motivated by different types of motivation for different behaviors. So, but again, essentially, if you are like, I want to increase healthy habits, for example, we want to have autonomous motivation to do so. And as we'll get into, there's many, many things that move us away from autonomous motivation for lots of things, but certainly for health. And,
right. Well, and the words that keep coming into my mind, and I don't know if they're used in this setting, is this intrinsic versus extrinsic.
Yes, they are. Yep.
Yeah. And so, intrinsic is coming from you, the person. And so if you're following that guidance, you kind of can't be wrong, because there's no external playbook.
Right.
But for the diet industry and the weight loss industry and the wellness industry, that's not a really great way to direct their potential audience, because they don't have money to be made on me essentially listening to myself.
Yeah, trust yourself. Go trust yourself.
Yeah, well, that's not going to make these companies like line their pockets with cash. Like, they've got to make me believe that they know better than me. Is that sort of like the fundamental thing that underlies all of this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, they have the solution for, they tell us that they have the solution to all of our problems, right? And we have to, and it's often some external plan or some combination of foods, which is, just not true.
Right. And how does that, okay, so what everybody knows, everybody that's listening to this has been on dozens of diets and dozens of plans and apps and programs. Like, it works for the short term. So explain that kind of psychology, because it is exciting and it's new, and you're like everybody knows how this feels, right? You're like all in. I mean, you're reverent to this program for a little while.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing falls apart. And how's that work?
Yeah. So much of that is because there is like the extrinsic or external rewards for your, let's say you're doing these habit changes or whatever, and you're getting, typically weight loss is what people, they feel good about, but then you get the compliments from other people, right? And so you're short term, you're getting these external rewards that keep you excited, that keep you motivated. You might have some intrinsic, feeling good too, like you might feel better in some ways in your life, like more energy or something, but it's almost like the weight loss focus clouds our ability to continue to stay motivated long term, because it gets so tied up with weight and what the scale is doing and what people are saying in terms of like, oh, they're saying I look good. And of course, as we both know, there's the biological factor that can cause like that weight rebound. That's, a huge part of it. But there also is a psychological factor when people start to regain weight. They feel like they're failing. It's not the diet, right? It's me. I'm a failure. And then that shame really can basically like metastasize and get worse and kind of operate under the surface. And then unfortunately, when we're ashamed, we keep it in, we think it's a moral failing, and then we tend to isolate, which makes everything worse. It makes us less motivated. And so, what the motivation theory is not like that complex. It can feel a little bit overwhelming at first, but essentially we're always thinking about like internal, external motivation, but what we really need to do is zoom out and think about the environment that the motivation happens in, and like, are we supporting these key psychological needs or not that help us move towards internal motivation or autonomous, whatever.
Right. Okay. So what are the other, so autonomy is one of the three
Yeah.
key psychological needs. And that really
Yep.
is speak to what you're talking about, this internal motivation, intrinsic reward system.
Mm-hmm.
Really just autonomy to me means you're driving the bus of your own decision making.
Exactly. Yeah. The definition I love is freedom of choice without excessive pressure. And so being able to kind of own your choices, you might get information from outside, but you're the one driving the bus. That's very well
Sure.
said. The other two are a feeling of competence. So effectiveness, feeling like I got this, right? And so feeling like you can set out to do whatever it is you want to do and then kind of achieve that goal. And that's where dieting initially we can feel effective, right? It can be short term, you can feel effective because many times a diet might lead to some result that we want of weight loss short term, but long term not, right? And in long term dieting, diet culture sets people up to feel completely ineffective. And so that's, of course, very
Sure. Well,
unhelpful.
and incompetent. I mean, really to take
Yeah.
the other side of that coin is, yeah, they give us all this knowledge or information or support. And so we feel autonomous and competent to start
Yep.
with.
Yep.
And then you realize over time that's never going to work because we can't really function independently. It's a business. And I say
Mhm.
this all the time. I'm like, we have to be honest here. The health, wellness, diet industry is a business model.
Yep.
It's not healthcare. It's not eating disorder prevention. It's not public health advocacy. It's not mental health support. It is a business. And if we don't
Mhm.
give them dollars, they go out of business. But that is
Yeah.
the bottom line. So
Mhm.
if we were truly competent, we wouldn't need that. We wouldn't need
Yeah.
them, right? So they
Right.
sort of sell us on this short-term competence so that they can rob us of our long-term ability to function independently.
Yeah, absolutely. And believe in ourselves, right? And continue to
Right.
believe, because that's, I think, the toughest thing to watch. And I certainly can relate to this. Like it just completely erodes our sense of trust in ourselves, and it can erode, like come into other areas, right? Like, well, I can't get this figured out, so something must be wrong with me. And what's really cool to see is like people break out of that cycle and realize like it wasn't their fault. It's not them. They become sort of almost bolder or braver in other areas of their life, which I think is just a cool side
Yeah.
effect
No,
of
I
building up that competence again.
100% agree with that. I mean, I conduct my relationships differently. I manage my business differently. I parent
Yep.
differently. Everything I do differently when I feel like I'm not under the thumb of this diet culture all the time. Because even though, I like, and it's just like you said earlier, since I didn't really perceive yourself, you said, I didn't really think I was dieting. Well,
Mm-hmm.
this diet culture mindset is so pervasive. We don't even recognize it as being something distinctive because we are so in it that
Oh yeah,
it's like reflexive behavior. I mean, and it's like complete
definitely.
gaslighting, right? Because it's like, oh, you're not dieting. We're not dieting. But we're actually all dieting so much we don't even know we're dieting.
Mm-hmm.
I
I
mean,
know it is. It's
that's messed
so,
up, right?
it is to look back and just be like, yeah, because I would have said like, I'm not on a diet. Yeah, I'm maybe working on eating to feel better, but like,
Right.
I'm
Oh,
not.
I'm just trying to eat right. Yeah. If you're not going to
Yeah.
Weight Watchers meetings, you're not on a diet. I mean, you're just, taking care of yourself and watching what you
Yes.
eat or whatever. All those, I'm doing
Yes.
lots of air quotes. So, okay. So
Yeah.
we autonomy, competence. What's the third key need?
Yeah. Relatedness. So a feeling of
Oh,
connection and feeling like one belongs in their community. Huge for
okay.
long-term motivation.
Yeah. So I can
Mhm.
see. So explain to me how diet culture sort of flips the switch on that too, because they have to bring you in under that guise and then they kind of turn on you later, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main place where like diet culture, and I guess I will say like diet culture and our weight loss obsessed, weight focused culture, medical system, everything, there's so many things where this, weight bias and discrimination based on people's weight, the fact that like we don't feel people you are less likely to be accepted potentially in a larger body, right? Like not always, but like that's it's been studied
Oh
across
yeah.
all areas. And so that that in itself sets it up for this feeling of disconnection or fear of disconnection if I gain weight, right? And that sets up for people to focus on weight loss, which again, what we're talking about, it just undermines everything. And of course, diet culture and the dieting industry specifically really wants us to feel like we're not enough, so we need to buy their products, right? And that's true of like many different products. There can be this marketing of like, you're not good enough as you are, and here's the way to get what you want, which often what we want as human beings is to feel loved, accepted, connected with others in our life, right? And so there's so many different examples of this, but like this idea of like what that the person has lost weight and they're walking down the beach with this new partner that they met, and look at how happy and connected and at peace they are, right? And so
Yeah.
selling this idea of connection and relatedness and tying it very closely with body size and weight loss is
Yes.
so
Right.
detrimental.
Yeah. And there's this idea, I'm not going to use the word cult because that's a strong word, but this idea that when you join one of these programs, communities, ways of behavior, you're with all these other people that are doing the same thing. So, theoretically, they've got kind of like some of the same aspirations and some of the same challenges that you have, and they're being, exposed to the same resources that you now have been offered. And you're it's like a secret club. I guess that's a better word. It's like you feel like I'm in this like elite group. And so you're connected to people through the dieting too. It's not even just the end product of, I might be more accepted if I'm in a smaller body, which socially is probably a true narrative. But during the process, there's this relatedness, right?
Yeah, definitely. The community support in many, like, because that's effective. Like that is a good way to keep people engaged in your program, and yet we need to build other places where people can feel connected. And that's something that like really, when you hear about I actually have like experience, like I said, in preventive cardiology, so like experience kind of knowing some of the data with like plant-based eating, which I think is good for people to know. However, we'll talk about like the blue zones and this idea of like Mediterranean eating patterns, but what people fail to talk about is the fact that like in those areas, people are very connected to their community. And so this idea of like, we can't say it's the exact eating pattern. I mean, I think there's some evidence that absolutely the eating pattern is health promoting, but like, what about the community?
We're talking about centenarians, right? So like 100-year-old people, how many, to be nerdy about it, compounding variables have been layered on top of the outcome over the course of 100-year lifespan, right?
Right.
So it's not just, you can't just say like, oh, somebody in like inner city Houston can like eat more fish and not have a heart attack. I mean, that is an absurd oversimplification, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like that I mean, if we would pick one factor that we need so much work on, it's this idea of like, how do we connect authentically? And obviously in our current climate today, more than in my lifespan, I've never seen any more concerns about polarization, and it's terrifying for our health.
Social animosity and
yeah.
Well, and that's really, I mean, I'm going to put on my public health hat for a minute, but this is what I have come to realize and sort of mature over my own career. And it sounds like maybe you've had some of the same evolution yourself, that, when we are like deep in the sciences, deep in that very objective, research-based sort of clinical environment, it's like there's data and this is right and this is how it's supposed to work. And of course we should be eating more whatever antioxidants, whatever it is, because we studied look at all these studies, look at this data, look at this p-value. Okay, that's great. And it's not untrue. I mean, there is scientific evidence that is true, but applying it to the general population at large is a science in itself. And I think
Yes.
a lot of doctors, and I don't want to speak for you, but maybe clinical psychologists, other researcher type people, they don't have that piece, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, we're not
Yeah.
saying it's wrong. We're saying it's wrong in this setting.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of a sciencey big word, but just the idea of like dissemination of research really just means like getting real world research out to people accurately in a way that actually helps to apply it to their life is something that like is a challenge. It's still a challenge for me. I still like use too many words that people are like, wait, Shawn, what are you saying? What does
Oh
it
my
mean,
gosh.
autonomy? Break it
This
down,
is
right?
why you and I just get along so well.
Right.
Talk nerdy to me all day long, right?
I know, I love it. But then I think I do think I've gotten better over my year of podcasting of like, and just talking with people and they're like, huh, how do I apply this? Right. But it's a skill. And I think that that's not something that we're really well trained in, as certainly I was on research track. That's what I wanted to do. And there's so much good research. So now I think of myself as like, get good research out into the world in a way that's supportive of people, but also empowering, right? And also accurate.
Right. Well, and I just think of from the kind of medical doctor perspective. I mean, and I am as guilty as the next one. I think we lose sight of how privileged in general medical doctors are. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
most people that are medical doctors, you know, have had access to food through their lives. They have had access, obviously, to education. They are, you know, really have a lot of social privilege even before becoming a doctor that colors our behavior when we are doctors. And so
Yeah.
I don't know, I have a lot more respect for the profession of public health being the kind of tie between the practice of medicine and the people. I mean, I guess that's what it is, right? That's, I'm sure my professor would be happy to hear me say like, yeah, that's the whole point, Maggie, you big dog. But
You got it.
it's,
Yeah.
you have to kind of understand, and I get, you know, the public health people sometimes when treating a group of people, they lose some of the nuance of the science of the like really sort of like almost bench science, because that's not their wheelhouse. And so being able to help connect the application of all these ideas that you and I are talking, like this whole idea of relatedness on autonomy and oh my gosh, competency, all these things like sound like a psychology textbook, but really regular people know exactly what that feels like.
Yeah.
They know exactly what it feels like when they join a weight loss program. And then when it goes off the rails 6 weeks later and they're shunned from the group and they feel stupid and they're gaining weight and they, you know, like everybody knows that experience. So we can strip all these fancy words away from it and really, you know, everybody understands what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's what like my hope is, like teaching people to know when they're in like external shame-based motivation and when they're like trusting themselves. And it's a process, right? And there's
Sure.
I often say like I use this framework for myself now in business. Like, when am I doing like shoulds, and like really when am I driven by like shame? And then how can I kind of notice that? Like, we're all going to be there sometimes, but how can I just notice that and be like, okay, what's right for me? Or is this in line with how I want to show up as a business owner? Or is this impacting my ability to show up as a mom, which was happening to me a lot last year, of just like, ooh, I'm failing my kids, right? And just noticing that it's uncomfortable, but there's a lot of power in being able to notice that, because it's not just, oh, I'm just going to be autonomously motivated my whole life, right? We're always going to have these like shoulds and stuff that shifts us to the external, but it can be, you can get more skilled at noticing it and be like, "Ooh, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna like, am I living my life for me? Am I in the driver's seat? Am I doing what really, it kind of intuitively feels right to me," right? I think of intuitive eating as more than just, you know, and certainly intuitive eating says this too, more than just listening to hunger and fullness, right? But it's like really being able to take outside information and incorporate like, what is best for me, and learning to trust yourself, and how good that can feel. And it takes time, being patient with yourself, but it's so worth it.
Yeah, it is. And I will tell you, just even the word intuition would have like made me run for the hills 10 years ago, because it seems all like psychobabble woo woo. I had
Yes.
this image in my head of somebody like, rubbing crystals together and singing kumbaya and lighting incense and like, you know what I mean? But
Yes.
intuition is part of human psychology. And I think if you could use it, leverage that to your advantage, really, the whole idea of intuition to me is being able to approach your own behavior neutral, like to be able to assess your own behavior without judging it. And
Mm-hmm.
especially in intuitive eating, that the neutrality, we talk about the neutrality of the language you use and the neutrality of food items and but the whole concept of neutrality is that like you might use some information and make a decision, but like the example I use for people, that because I get people ask me questions like, am I allowed to eat a salad? Like they feel like they go out to eat, once they become intuitive eaters, they like have to order fettuccine Alfredo just to like stick it to
Right.
the man or something,
Yeah.
And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no.
Right.
The
Yes.
difference behind all of that is the motivation. Like the idea
Mm-hmm.
of everything is available to you, and you want to have a salad for lunch because you have a meeting this afternoon and you don't want to be sluggish, and you know that eating a giant plate of pasta and trying to conduct a meeting at your office is a challenge for you at 2 p.m. That's
Mm-hmm.
an autonomous decision. If you
Yes.
order a salad because it's got the little green leaf on the menu and it's the lowest calorie option and all your friends are eating salad and your diet coach tells you to eat a salad, that's external motivation.
Yes.
But it's the
Absolutely.
exact salad. You can have the salad. It's why you make the choices you make is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always say, like, it's easy to make assumptions and judge because that's what our brains are designed to do. But like, only you can ever know if you're in diet mentality or if you're making an intuitive, autonomous choice, like ever. Right. And I
That's the
think
whole
we
point.
can,
Yeah.
yes. And I think in sometimes, even in the anti-diet space, like, I don't think this is intended, but I think sometimes with like polarization in social media, it can be like, well, you're exercising this much, or you're eating in that way, or you're eating this style, you must be still in diet mentality. And it's like, you don't know. You don't know. You're not in that person's body. You're not in their brain. And so just catching yourself when you do that, and reminding yourself that, like, maybe they are and maybe they're not. And that's that's okay.
Right. And just exploring, I encourage people all the time. I said the singular question to ask yourself is why? Like every single decision you're making, why? Why are you going to CrossFit at 4 o'clock in the morning? Why are you eating fettuccine Alfredo? Why are you doing this? Why are you like, you decide why? And if the why is satisfactory to you,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. That's the only benchmark, really.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
and wouldn't that be much easier if we all sort of lived like that, right?
Yes, it is empowering, and there's so many barriers to getting there, right? And even if nothing else, like, it's hard sometimes to be honest with ourselves, and that's okay. Like, that's to really dig deep and be honest with ourselves about anything in our lives can sometimes be painful, because we're like, ooh, I didn't really
How do,
realize I felt that way about it, or, oh man, I still have this really entrenched diet culture belief. That sucks, right? Like, I wish I didn't, but like, good to know, right? I always say, like, bringing these thoughts out into the light of day, whether it's like an unhelpful belief, or like, let's say someone just realizes, like, wow, I just really am being super self-critical about this still. Like, that's so frustrating. I thought I was farther along. And it's like, that's a valid frustration, but also, when you discover that, that's a good thing. You're able to then work with it. And so, kind of being able to pat yourself on the back when you notice unhelpful thinking patterns or unhelpful beliefs about yourself, that's a good thing, as painful as it can be in the moment.
right. Well, let me tell you what, we could talk about this all day long because I'll tell you what, I talk nerdy to me. I love this kind of stuff. Really,
It's
there's
fun.
so much you can't understand any of this anti-diet work without at least dabbling in the psychology of wellness. So
For sure.
now you're like the expert, but everybody can understand why they act certain ways. There's an entry point to these ideas for people that have zero background in this kind of, professional discipline.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
What I would like for you to share with everybody is where they find you and what your podcast is about, because if they're listening to this one, they're going to go over and follow yours immediately, I'm sure. And tell us where everybody can find you at.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say my podcast first. I am very, very proud of, as I just mentioned to you, we just hit a year of producing episodes weekly. And like, I really enjoy the podcast. And so it's called Motivation Made Easy, Body Respect, True Health. And yeah, we have a lot of experts from medicine, nutrition, psychology, but I bring on people who are willing to share their journey in their relationship with food. And what I love to do is really look at like stories and pull out themes. And I think we can see each other and we can see ourselves in other people's stories. So I think that as much as I actually love talking about data and science, we talk about that a bit, but I really do like to just let's apply this. Let's talk about how this is showing up in this person's life. So with my experts and also my guests that come on. So that's the first and best place to find me. But also great places, my website, drshawnhondorp.com. That's HONDORP. And there's lots of free resources there. And I am also on Instagram at psychology.of.wellness. So I'm not posting a ton on social media, but I definitely post about my episodes, and I have a growing team that's actually doing some cool social media content.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah. Well, I will put the show notes below this episode. We'll have all of those links so people can find you really easily. And especially your podcast is outstanding. I love it. And it's you do make these somewhat complicated ideas very, very tangible for people. And like you said, we all are struggling with the same, basic idea. These autonomous motivation is a fancy word, but like I said, everybody knows what it feels like. Everybody's had that, totally ransacked by diet culture. So hearing other people's stories and how they are recovered, I guess, healed. I don't know what the word is, but yeah, we all want to rescue ourselves from that place that's so negative. Well, thank
absolutely.
Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you giving your time to my audience.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
I knew you would love that. She's a gem. And we did spend a lot of time with the lead up to like really the meat of the content. But I think hearing her story on what she went through to come to this place represents where a lot of health professionals, I think, don't keep going. We know what we're doing just doesn't exactly sit right. We know that the way we were trained or taught just doesn't kind of jive with what we're seeing, like real life boots to the ground clinical practice. But having the courage and the fortitude to decide that you will practice with complete integrity and you will do it in your own way. Shawn is like such a great representation of that. And I aspire to be like that. And I hope you feel that way too. And were moved by her conversation and her story and really enjoyed that interview today. So appreciate you being here on the Efluencer podcast. Reminder, if you're a pro, to check out my show notes and click on the resources I have, including the free training of how to break up with the BMI to fast track your client's progress. All right, I will see you there, and we'll have a new episode of the Efluencer podcast next Wednesday. Until next time. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landis MD, and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandismd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.